Welcome back into another edition of the Fantasy Authority Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Steele. You can find me on Twitter at FantasyWrath13. Joined, as always, by the great Cody Kutzer. You can find him on Twitter at CKutzerFF. I tried to think of something funny there, but it didn't come to me fast enough. So I was like, keep it moving. What's going on tonight?
Not much, man. I'm actually I'm struggling a little bit. So last night I'm awful remembering dreams, but I wake up at like 2:30 in the morning to my wife just like shaking me to wake me up. And apparently I was having like a nightmare because I was literally screaming in my sleep. And like the only thing I remember is I had like a demon or like someone that was, yeah, man, like it was there was like someone coming after me and like was not stopping. So I guess I was like screaming in my sleep. So after my wife woke me up, like I said, it was like 2:30 in the morning. My mind was like playing tricks on me the whole time. So like I was thinking I was seeing like my bedroom door open and like shit scurrying across the floor. So like even after I woke up, man, like I could not fall asleep. So I'm struggling a little bit right now. I'm pretty beat, but luckily we have a pretty exciting division to talk about here for as far as fantasy purposes go. So we're gonna power through it, man. We're professionals, right?
Oh, we are. We definitely are, right? Just killing it. So we're going to talk about the NFC South tonight. You could argue one of the best divisions in football, and especially for fantasy purposes, there is a lot of fantasy goodness in this division. So we are going to be talking about the NFC South, and we're also going to be doing some Keeper League talk as well. I don't think Keeper Leagues get enough conversation or surrounding them, and people don't spend enough time on Keeper Leagues because I don't know why, to be honest with you. But they should. It's basically all I play. So I love me some Keeper League talk. So we're gonna get into some of that as well because we're getting a little closer to that time for people to start thinking about these things and start really having discussions. Because the thing I like about Keeper Leagues is they're kind of a mix between a dynasty and a redraft league, depending on how deep you decide to go with them. So, anyways, other than that, really quickly before we start, I did want to bring up, we do have kind of a cool idea that we're working on, and it's going to be another podcast that we're going to be doing. We'll probably just do it seasonally, over the off season, but we're going to be bringing on some veterans and kind of just talking with them about like their their military experience. I'm a veteran myself. I don't really talk about that much, but I was actually in the Navy. And we're going to be bringing some of them on and kind of just discussing things and, their military experience. And, a lot of people that were in the military kind of had fantasy leagues while they were in. And if we can find some people with that, we're not just bringing on analysts. We're going to be bringing on, just your regular guy who's a fantasy guy who plays fantasy football. So if that's you or if anybody would be interested in that, reach out to us on Twitter and at FantasyWrath13 or at CKutzerFF, and we'll get you lined up on the show because I think it can be a lot of fun and get a lot of good conversations out of it. So we're also going to be coming up with a charity as well that we're going to be using to kind of donate as well and kind of bring some money for some veterans who often go overlooked a lot of times, especially when they come back from their service and deployments and everything else. So I think it'll be a lot of fun. So more information on that probably next week, but that's something we are definitely excited about. So anyways, why don't we get this going? Why don't you start us off there, Cody, with the Carolina Panthers?
Yeah, man, this one's gonna be really interesting to see how everything plays out. Basically, the entire coaching staff has changed. I think they kept on two coaches from the previous regime. I think it was like a special teams coach and maybe somebody else on offense. But obviously, they brought in Matt Rule from Baylor as their head coach. The whiz kid Joe Brady coming in from LSU as their offensive coordinator. He was the passing game coordinator at LSU, obviously with that historic offense. So, I mean, we really don't have anything to go off from them as far as like NFL goes. Obviously, we're going to expect that they bring some of what they were doing at Baylor and at LSU to the pros, but obviously that's not going to be a one-to-one kind of replacement there. I think from everything I was reading and listening to from Joe Brady, it's going to be a spread heavy offense. And basically the thing that Brady kept reiterating the entire time in the conferences and whatnot was just getting their best players and getting them the ball in space. So obviously that makes a lot of sense with guys like DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, Robbie Anderson, Ian Thomas, obviously McCaffrey there. But as far as trying to predict, like a run pass kind of split or anything like that, like I don't really think that's fair to look at what they were doing in college and transfer that over to the NFL. As far as additions to the team, obviously they brought in Teddy Bridgewater, signed him to the 2 or 3 year deal. Brought in Robbie Anderson as well. Robbie Anderson had some ties to Matt Rule with his time at Temple. And what's kind of funny is they bring in all these offensive-minded coaches, right? And then in the NFL draft, every single one of their picks was defense. And they're the first team in modern NFL, so I'm assuming that's post-merger, to use every single pick on the defensive side of the ball. So I thought that was kind of funny, and I don't think a lot of people would have seen that coming. But as far as what to look for with the players that they have that have been in the NFL, Teddy Bridgewater obviously going to be running that offense. Hasn't had a true starting gig for quite some time, but obviously had a little stretch with the Saints last year. If you look at what he did, though, it's not super exciting for fantasy purposes. Last year in 2019, across his handful of starts, he was last in intended average air yards, and he was second to last in completed average air yards. So the addition of Robbie Anderson kind of makes you wonder how that's going to shake out, because that's kind of how he's been used, obviously, in his time in the NFL, has been that field stretcher with the deep balls. And that's not Teddy's game. So this does seem like it's going to be more of a spread and a run after catch kind of offense. With McCaffrey, obviously a running back, I mean, we don't have to go too far into him. The only question I would have with McCaffrey is, one, what happens to his targets in this new offense? I mean, last year I think he was 8th in the NFL in targets, obviously across all positions. There were only 7 guys last year who had more targets than he did. What is that going to look like? He's obviously still going to be heavily utilized. Edwards-Helaire, that's one of the things we've been talking about a lot with him and how involved he was in the passing game. So that's obviously not going to go completely away, but I do wonder how far that's going to come down from like the 140 I think he had last year. Year before that was like 124. So where does that land? Then the thing is, who's going to be behind McCaffrey? I don't think me and you are big believers in handcuffing as far as redraft strategies go, but there is something to be said for what happens if McCaffrey gets an injury. It's obviously something we see, especially with the running back position, every single year. But behind him, there's really not there's not a guy you look at and go, oh, okay, yeah, I completely trust and believe in him. Reggie Bonifant, Jordan Scarlett. They brought in Mike Davis. Rodney Smith was a UDFA from Minnesota. So that's something. Hopefully we get some sort of off-season training camp kind of news and notes for a guy to watch out for, because obviously if McCaffrey were to miss any time, that's going to be a huge waiver wire target in redraft, and obviously too in dynasty leagues, depending on how deep they are. I can't imagine Reggie Bonifant and Scarlett or Mike Davis, any of those guys are heavily owned across dynasty leagues. Then the wide receiver group, obviously DJ Moore, the unquestioned alpha. I don't see his role changing. Obviously that spread kind of run after catch suits him really well. With Curtis Samuel, Robbie Anderson, I mean, last year Curtis Samuel was a huge favorite for a lot of guys. And then it seemed like every single week, if you're looking at buy low or sneaky ads or, trade target kind of articles or content, you were going to find Curtis Samuel in there in at least 3, 4, 5 of them, depending on how many you were looking at. And that had to do a lot with the fact that he was getting an absurd amount of air yards, but they just weren't connecting whatsoever. And if you look at air yards from last year, out of the top think it was top 23, 25 in air yards. There were only two guys on that list who did not have at least 1,000 receiving yards. And it was actually Curtis Samuel and Robbie Anderson. And I think Robbie Anderson still had like 150 more receiving yards than Curtis Samuel did. Like I talked about with Teddy, obviously that's not going to be what his game is. So getting these guys in space, like I said, getting them the ball and letting them kind of just do what they do after the catch is going to be the big thing there. Kev, my question for you, out of the two secondary guys there, because I know you're a DJ Moore fan, are you going to be really targeting either of those guys? If you look at Best Ball 10's ADP in the month of May, DJ Moore currently going at 30.87. Are you paying for that price? And like I said, are you going to be going after either Samuel or Robbie Anderson?
I think what worries me about this offense in general is Teddy Bridgewater. We've sort of talked about it earlier after this move happened. Like, I'm not overly excited about Teddy Bridgewater. I think he's an adequate game manager, but I think that's about as far as it can go. He's never been somebody, even when he was in Minnesota, was never somebody, but pre-injury was not somebody that we ever thought was going to be anything more than what he is. You can look at his deep ball stuff from last year and think that, some of his percentages is pretty good. However, he was down league worst in terms of attempts, right? I think it was like 34th, 35th, 36th or something like that in terms of deep ball attempts. And so I think that is a problem for a guy like Robbie Anderson, who's best used as a vertical threat. And then you have from there, Curtis Samuel. Now, I like the offense, and I think this is going to be a really innovative offense, and I think that they're going to be able to scheme ways to get the ball in some of these guys' hands. I know the term of there's too many mouths to feed in this offense. I think some of that is going to be true. But with that being said, like I think I would lean a little bit more towards Curtis Samuel just because he's a little bit more dynamic in space, and I think that they will figure out some unique ways to get him the ball. So I would lean more towards Curtis Samuel in this offense currently. I also think Ian Thomas is somebody who is a very interesting prospect as well, somebody that you can probably get later in drafts. As far as Christian McCaffrey goes, like I do expect some regression from him. It's not anything major. I currently have him ranked as my number 2 running back, and for a lot of people, he's going to be their number 1. But I do expect a little bit of regression from him, but I don't think it's going to be anything substantial. I do think they now have a little bit of Teddy Bridgewater is an upgrade for what they had for most of last year after Cam Newton went down. So overall, like I like this team, but this defense is not going to be very good. They lost James Bradbury, Luke Kuechly retired. It's going to be a team that's going to have, and they're in one of the best divisions in football, with the other 3 teams having elite or close to elite level offenses. So there's going to be a lot of fantasy points to go around, and this is going to be kind of the theme with this whole entire division. So that's probably right where I said I'd rather have Curtis Samuel, the long way around of saying it. And then as far as DJ Moore goes, I don't hate that price because I could easily. I've thought about having him as my wide receiver, as a wide receiver 1, probably 11 or 12. But once the Teddy Bridgewater thing, like I probably bump him down a little bit further, maybe 14 or 15. But I really like DJ Moore, and I think he's only getting better. And so I do remember last year, like especially like before the season started, there were people that were like, I'd rather have Curtis Samuel than DJ Moore, and that's ridiculous. Like DJ Moore is the truth, and he's only going to get better. He's still very young.
Yeah, you mentioned Ian Thomas. I like him as a late round tight end target. He's currently going with a May ADP. Again, looking at Best Ball 10s, and I think that's probably our best source of ADP right now. 148.2, and he's coming off the board at tight end 20. So he's a favorite, kind of late round target of mine. Let's move on, man. Let's go to the Saints here. What you got on them?
Well, let's do the Falcons, and I will start with them. They are a team that did not have any coaching changes. They did bring in a few guys, not a ton, but they brought in Todd Gurley. They got rid of Devonta Freeman. And And then they signed former first-round pick Laquan Treadwell. He's made it on this roster as their number 3 wide receiver. In the draft, 5 of the 6 draft picks went on the defensive side of the ball. Their only offensive player was center Matt Hennessy out of Tennessee, who is a center. So if you look at this team, and again, this is kind of going to be the same scenario. Like, their defense was really bad last year. They have some good pieces, Keanu Neal, and a few other like assets that you really like on defense. But overall, their defense was really bad. They got rid of Desmond Trufant. And I don't think that's going to change dramatically. Like, a lot of people were really skeptical about the A.J. Terrell pick in the first round, that they overdrafted him at pick 16 and stuff like that. So we'll see how this works out for the Falcons. But I still feel like that this is going to be a team that's going to have to throw the ball a ton. And so for me, if you look at Matt Ryan last year, he finished as QB 10 overall. He had 17.7 fantasy points per game, which was also 10th overall. He only played in 14 games. He was 22nd in fantasy points per dropback, so that kind of tells you a little bit about his efficiency. But if you look at it, I mean, there was lots to like. The Falcons were number 1 last year in pass attempts per game. Again, due a lot in large part to how bad that defense was last year. But he also finished 5th in passing yards, 3rd in completed air yards, 7th in money throws, 8th in passing touchdowns, and 12th in deep ball percentage. So there's lots to like with Matt Ryan, right? And we know that, like, Matt Ryan was a guy last year, a lot of people were looking at him. Because I remember last year, like a majority of their games were going to be played in domes. And there was a lot to like with him last year, and he paid off, right? I think 6 of his weeks ended up being QB1 weeks, I believe. I think he was also 2nd in 300-yard passing games. He had 10 300. So if you're in a league with that gets that bonus, that was also good for him. So overall, when you look at this offense, like with Matt Ryan, they didn't really lose anybody. The biggest question is going to be wide receivers, correct? Like, because as of right now, when you look at their wide receiver group, I mean, it's Julio Jones and it's Calvin Ridley. They obviously sent Mohamed Sanu packing last year, but I mean, Julio's not getting any younger, right? I think this is going to be his age 31 season, though he was still elite last year. He finished as wide receiver 4 and wide receiver 3 in fantasy points per game. He also finished 2nd in targets among wide receivers, 5th in receptions, 2nd in yards, and he had 6 touchdowns, which that's always been Julio Jones, right? Like, he struggles to score touchdowns. So, I mean, he also finished 6th in yards per route run. He was number 1 in total target distance. So he did not drop off, I guess is what I'm getting at with reading all that, right? Like, he's not somebody that, like, okay, we're starting to see a decline in his game, because we did not see that last year. He's continuing to play at a really high level, and he's still considered, a top 5 wide receiver in the league. And I don't think, those target numbers that he got, it's not going anywhere. And it could potentially go up, considering the fact that Austin Hooper is now gone out of this offense as well. Calvin Ridley played 13 games last year. He was 18th in fantasy points per game with 17.7. He did only receive 80% of a snap share, which was 44th among wide receivers, so that was a little concerning. But he was 19th in target separation. He only had 131 yards after the catch, which is somewhat concerning. That was 72nd in the league and 21st in yards per target. So with Calvin Ridley, like, I think both these guys are very viable fantasy assets, right? And I think they're both going to see a lot of targets. I think that Julio in that 150 to 170 range in terms of targets is certainly in the range of possibilities. And then with Calvin Ridley, I think you look at somewhere in that 100 to 120 target range, if not a little bit higher. The big issue is going to be if anything happens to these guys. So I was like, well, who is it going to be, right? They have Laquan Treadwell, which Laquan Treadwell has been a bust. And so unless he all of a sudden turns into something, my boy Christian Blake, who I was all over for fantasy or for DFS last year 1 week, I guess he's an option. But they don't really have a lot. Like, that is a position I thought they might address in the draft, especially how deep it was, but they did not choose to do so. They had bigger needs along the defensive front, but we'll see. But on paper, I mean, Julio and Calvin Ridley are certainly both there as guys. And then, the other issue last year was the running game, right? You had a bunch of, what was it? Brian Hill. I remember the Brian Hill hype after Devonta Freeman went down, and everybody was super excited. Everybody spent a lot of money on Brian Hill and Fab and spent high waiver priorities to pick him up, and it didn't do anything, which was really tilting. But now we have Todd Gurley who comes in, who, as we know, has trouble with his knees, and so it. But if you look at it, they basically Devonta Freeman and Todd Gurley pretty much had the same number of touches last year. Last year, Devonta Freeman had 243 total touches, and I think he steps right into that and probably gets that same exact number or somewhere right around there, which is exactly what he had last year with the Rams. And he basically averaged 17 touches per game 17 touches per game. And I think the biggest question for Gurley is can his knees withstand another season? I know haters are going to hate, right, with him, but this offensive line, they've really invested in this offensive line. As I already mentioned, one of their picks was another offensive lineman. Last year, they invested two of their offensive linemen. Or two of their first-round picks were on the offensive line. This is something that they've really tried to invest and upgrade. And I do think that if this offense can get going, I do think Todd Gurley can be a little bit of a value because he is going a little bit later than what most people are accustomed to with him. I think a lot of people have him like at running back 15, 16, 17, something like that. And I think he could end up sneaking into like an RB1 type season, depending on how things play out. I think he gets a little bit more involved in the passing game, which I think will be good for him. Last year, Devonta Freeman, I think, had like 55 receptions, which was more than I thought that he had, to be honest with you. So I think if he can get to that number, I think Todd Gurley is going a little bit undervalued. Where do you come in on him?
Yeah, it seems like that's where the range that he should be going. I just pulled up again Best Ball 10's ADP for the month of May, and he is going at RB17, but his ADP is still 27.8. So that's still, if you just told me RB17, I wouldn't think he was going that early in drafts. But yeah, he just needs if his efficiency can take a tick up, I think you're not going to get too many people debating you saying that he's going to a better offensive line, at least in terms of investment, right, with Atlanta. So if his yards per carry can get back up to where kind of his career average used to be, even if he's not getting 290, 300 touches, if his efficiency can be a little bit more, if he's going to be as involved as Freeman was last year in the passing game, I think there's definitely a case to be made to see him kind of slide into that, RB11 to RB14 range. And I mean, at that point, that would be a value. Like I said, although I was a little surprised to see he was still going, early third with that RB17 price tag. And again, this is best ball, so you kind of have to take that into consideration slightly. But I think if he starts to slide a little bit more, because it happens every year, there's going to be somebody who gets bumped up, right? People we start talking about, like last year happened with Godwin. When we first started talking about him, he was, going 5th, 6th round, and before you know it, he's going up into 3rd. So there's going to be guys that jump up that push him down. So I do like Gurley, and I can see him going later than where he's going right now come July, August.
Yeah, we'll have to see with him. But like I said, I'm not entirely scared off him. It depends on where he would go. If he started going in the second, mid-second, I probably wouldn't have any interest. But if he continues going in the 3rd or late 3rd, something like that, where we start to see a little bit shift here, because I think once we get the rookies and start to really involved in this, and the rookie fever really starts to take shape, I think it's going to push some of these other guys down as well. So I don't know. I do think Todd Gurley in this offense can be more effective than what he was last year with the Rams. So we'll see. The other one, we sort of talked about Austin Hooper now. Austin Hooper's gone. Hayden Hurst last year with the Ravens had 40 targets, 30 receptions, 349 yards, 2 touchdowns. He only averaged 4.8 fantasy points per game, which is not something you're looking for, but that's obviously a limited opportunity. However, if you look at some of his efficiency numbers, there is something to be that is positive with it. He finished 11th in fantasy points per target, 7th in yards per target, 6th in yards per pass route, which are some pretty strong efficiency numbers for him. And so he could be stepping into a situation where last year Austin Hooper, commanded about, I think it was 18% target share. And so I think he could realistically look at about 15 to 18% target share here. And I like Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry does have some athleticism to his game. He's still relatively young. I mean, for a tight end, he's only 26. I know he was older whenever he was drafted, whenever he came out, and that was one knock against him. But, Mark Andrews obviously stole the show there, and they decided to trade him. So I think Hayden Hurst, depending on where he ends up going in
There you
drafts,
go.
could be a really strong value and somebody that I have some interest in.
Yeah, for sure. I think he was more athletic than what Hooper was, and obviously Hooper was getting those targets because of guys like Calvin Ridley being banged up. So I think I like Hurst in this offense more than Hooper. Maybe looking at him as having the at least the same floor as he did, maybe even a little bit of a higher ceiling, because I do think he is a little bit more athletic than Hooper.
Yeah, and so there's nobody else there. I think it's I can't. Caden Graham, I think, is the other tight end who played pretty well in the preseason and was a big air yards guy as well. So yeah, I think some things are looking up for Hayden Hurst and another. I think this year for tight end is going to be interesting because there seems to be more options this year than we typically have. With guys like we already talked about Ian Thomas and Hayden Hurst and the Noah Fants and Dallas Goederts, some of these secondary tight ends a little bit. So I think this year is going to be interesting with the tight end position. So I think that's pretty much right. Do you have anything else you want to put in on these guys?
No, sir. I think we can move on.
All right. Well, so tell us a little bit about the Nolans Saints.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we don't really have too much of a track record with them. They're completely new on the block. We don't know what they're going to do. It's going to be completely up in the air. No, I mean the Saints super stable situation. I mean, across the entire NFL, let alone the NFC South. No major coaching changes. We know what they want to do on offense. We know what their pieces are. They did have some key additions this year. Obviously, Manny Sanders coming in gives them probably their best wide receiver too they've had in quite some time. Jameis Winston signed the 1-year deal there. They took Cesar Ruiz, the interior offensive lineman out of Michigan, the first, and they traded up in the third to take Adam Troutman, the small school tight end. So that's interesting, but I still think that's going to be, especially with not knowing of how all this is going to break with the coronavirus and everything, like we've been touching on, feels like every week for the past 4 or 5 weeks. I still think it's going to be Jared Cook's role to lose, and I don't really see that, especially coming. I think he was out of Dayton, if I'm remembering correctly. Small school guy, probably going to have that learning curve coming to the NFL. So he's not anyone I'm going to be super interested in as far as redraft and dynasty. That's a different story. If you look at what the Saints have done the past 3 years, they've just been super efficient. 2017, fourth in scoring, first in yards per play. But like if you look at the amount of plays they're running, their pass attempts and things like that. I mean, they were 19th in pass attempts, 5th in yards though, 13th in rush attempts, 5th in yards there. And that's kind of been the how everything is shaken out, like I said, over the past 3 years. The thing that has been happening is you've seen Drew Brees's, or I guess just because obviously last year he only had 11 starts. You've seen the pass attempts in that offense dropping each year. I think up until 2 years ago, Brees did not have an NFL season with less than like 600 pass attempts. I think it was since like 2009 or something. And obviously with their defense getting better, with that run game improving between Kamara and whoever he was splitting the backfield was with, whether that was Latavius Murray or what can I think of his name? Help me out. Went to Baltimore. Why can't I think of his name?
Mark Ingram.
Jesus Christ. Thank you.
What is wrong with you? Next time you come on this podcast, I want you to bring your A game. If you got to down some Red Bulls real quick before you come on, okay? Just
listen, man. I had a fucking demon chasing me last night. All right, I'm a little off the game, and the last thing I want to do is be up all night, all scattered brain, looking around, waiting for the demon to come get me underneath the bed and crawling out of my closet. All right, so let's move on. Okay, cut me some slack. You said Hunter Henry like 5 times. I think I'm allowed to forget Mark Ingram's name for a second. All right.
Did I say that? I said Hunter Henry.
You said Hunter Henry like 3 or 4 times in a row, then you finally corrected yourself toward the end. So
Why didn't you stop me? See, that is what a co-host does. A co-host says, "You know what, Kevin? Quit sounding like an idiot. It's not Hunter Henry," which I know that. I don't know why I was saying it. I think it was the Hayden, Hurst, kind of the double H.
The double H. Because
threw me
I had faith in you that you would correct course, and you did. See, I had faith.
See, I was wobbly. We hit some turbulence, but I stuck the damn landing. Okay, but I'm just saying. All right. Next time you should say, "Hey, dumbass, it's not Hunter Henry. It's Hayden Hurst." Okay.
See, I was letting you go in case you tried to jump on me. I could just throw it back in your face.
Okay.
All right.
See, I could edit that part out, so no one's actually ever going to know it. Just throwing that out there.
It's live. The people are with me. All right. Like I said, though, we know Drew Brees, one of the most efficient quarterbacks that we've seen, possibly ever, right? In terms of his completion percentage, everything like that. Like I said, his attempts have been dropping, but he's making up for that with his efficiency. We know what that running back situation is going to be like between Kamara and Latavius Murray. Obviously, Kamara had a super disappointing year last year, the injuries and everything. And it seems like the Saints haven't wanted to give him the workhorse load even before the injuries. And I think it's just going to make it more likely that that they're not going to give him that bell cow role. So he's going to need to pick up his efficiency the way that he did. I think it was 2 years ago, or maybe it was his rookie year where he had like close to like 7 yards per carry or something ridiculous like that. I think in his second year, he had all the touchdowns to go along with it. So he's going to need the efficiency to pick back up as well as the touchdowns to pay off on his draft price, because you're taking him in the first round. With the offense and the situation, he has everything set up there. So if you look at whoever the RB2 has been, whether it's been, because that was Kamara his rookie year, right? Ingram was the RB1, Kamara was the RB2. It didn't end up being that way in terms of
Adrian Peterson was also there. Remember?
Oh yeah, that was a thing for
because that's what pushed Alvin Kamara down, because that's why people weren't as high on Alvin Kamara. And Alvin Kamara was definitely a league winner because the corpse of Adrian Peterson, who didn't last very long and then ended up going to the Cardinals.
Yeah, that was even pushing him down in dynasty leagues too. I remember.
Yeah, but let's be honest though here. Okay, so with Alvin Kamara, basically the problem was because his efficiency numbers were there, but the problem was really the touchdown numbers. He only had 6 touchdowns last year, and which was way down from what he had the year before. So we knew he was in for regression. We just weren't expecting that kind of regression. But the rest of everything else was there. I mean, he was still 8th in fantasy points per game. He still was 17th in red zone touches. He was 5th in targets with 97, despite the fact that he missed 2 games. So there's a lot to like here still with Alvin Kamara. I'm not saying you're saying that he's going to have a down year, but I still think that you're probably right. He's probably best suited to be a 1A or 1B and not really be a complete workhorse back, which is why they brought in Latavius Murray, which I do think Latavius Murray has some standalone value. I don't think it's quite like Mark Ingram's, and the fact of like whenever he was there, and then they had the ridiculous season where they both finished as top 5 running back, which was
it was like
insane.
Number 2 and number 5 or something like that.
So it's certainly in the range of possibility. But my point is that I'm not overly concerned with Alvin Kamara, and I think that he's going to be just fine. And I think I have him as RB4 right now or something like that in terms of my rankings. So I think in this entire offense, to be honest with you, I don't think there's a lot to talk about because, Michael Thomas is likely the unquestioned number 1 wide receiver. If you want to make a case for like a Devontae Adams, fine. But I think Michael Thomas should be. Drew Brees, I think he's going to slip down for a lot of people a little bit, but I do think the Manny Sanders addition and fucking Traquan Smith eventually is going to break out one of these years. He's going to fucking do something. He's going to wake up and maybe actually do something. I'm holding my truther status for Traquan, but we'll see. So I just think this offense is what it is, right? Like it's fantasy goodness. They play in a dome, and there's not really anything new here to really discuss, I think. Would you agree?
No. Yeah. I agree. The only thing is Michael Thomas. Obviously, he's not going to be getting 180 targets again with the addition of Manny Sanders. Because, like I said, I think that's like even with Sanders being as old as he is, like he is their best wide receiver too in quite some time.
One, shut your mouth. No. because Traquan. But no, do you remember?
Come on.
But do you remember though? It wasn't that long ago, a couple years ago, with Michael Thomas, where people are like, "Yeah, he's not going to get that crazy kind of target share." Okay, Sean Payton never does that. He does not give that kind of. So Drew Brees spreads the ball around. Okay, so don't be expecting all this fantasy goodness from Michael Thomas. Okay, don't expect that. Remember? Do you remember that? It was only a couple years ago, and I was like, "You guys are fucking stupid." But anyways.
Well, I mean, compared to what he got last year, I think his rookie year was like 120, and then the 2 years after that, it was like 145, 149. He didn't get up to that 150. So I mean, I guess if you're hanging on to the hat of like 170, 180 targets, he didn't get there. So I do think he's going to come back down to like that 140 area. But like I said, with Drew Brees being as efficient and as accurate as he is, like 140 Drew Brees targets are more than good enough to give you a wide receiver, like the wide receiver 1, the wide receiver 2 kind of season, right?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think he still comes in at about 160, 170. I think it's probably where he ends up coming in.
How many do you see Manny Sanders getting then?
I don't know, because I mean, if you look at Manny Sanders last year, once he went to San Francisco, now different offense, of course, different everything, so it's a little bit different. But I mean, he wasn't really the same guy. He wasn't involved in the offense. We'll see if he still has anything left in the tank, but I don't think he's going to be drawing some huge target share. I mean, I think he may command like a 15% target share in the offense. And so, 15 to 18, somewhere in that range. So, I 100%, I'm not really all that concerned with Michael Thomas. I think Michael Thomas is going to continue to eat.
Right.
The real question is going to be, though, is the fantasy landscape of what's going to happen if anything happens to Drew Brees this year and he has to miss some time and we get Jameis in that offense. It's going to be
glorious.
It is going to be so fantastic.
It's going to be awesome. So real quick, last thing, since we were talking about Manny Sanders before we move on to your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Currently, Sanders is going at 111.6 and is wide receiver 47. Now, if you're saying you don't see him getting too many targets in this offense, do you think that's about right for him and where he's going, or do you think that's too low? Because to me, that seems like wide receiver 47. That seems 10 spots too low. Like I could easily see him having like a back end wide receiver 3 season in 2020.
The problem is that, well, one, Alvin Kamara's involvement in the passing game, right? Like I think Alvin Kamara gets somewhere in the 100, 110 target range. He had 97 last year and only 14. So that you have to factor that in. Then you have Jared Cook, who is going to have a role in this offense. I don't think there's going to be enough targets going around because I still like to run the football. I just don't know if there's going to be enough for him to really command that. And it is true that he does try to spread the ball around outside of Michael Thomas, of course. But so I'm fine with that ADP. I think that's fine. I think any higher than that, if he was going like 35, 36, I wouldn't be interested.
Okay. Interesting. I think we have our first disagreement of the 2020 season. Good,
and we'll find out why you're wrong. We will continue this on another day. But let's move on to the most exciting team of this podcast, and that is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers fantasy preview. There's so many different things to unpack here with this offense because we just talked about the GOAT, Jameis Winston, moved on. He got his eyes fixed, and now he's gone, but they bring in Tom Brady. And who knows where he's going to go, right? Last year, Tom Brady looked washed, did not look like the same Tom Brady, but he was also playing with probably the worst offense in terms of offensive weapons in the entire league. And now, this year, the Patriots' offense is certainly the worst offense in the league. And, the biggest thing is I don't think we would be talking about that as much if Tom Brady was still there. But now you bring Tom Brady in, and this offense is absolutely loaded. They have the GOAT, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans. They brought in your boy, Tyler Johnson. They brought Rob Gronkowski back out of retirement. They still have O.J. Howard. They still have Cameron Brate. This offense is absolutely stacked right now. In terms of Tom Brady, though, I do think that he can have another solid season, a Tom Brady type season that we come to expect. I think he can put up wide receiver QB1 numbers, and I think that things are going to turn around a little bit. I know people seem to think that he's completely washed. I don't think so, and I think that with all of this offensive talent that they have around him, I think he is in a great spot to succeed. So with that, like if you look at the rest of this team, first let's start at the wide receivers. We don't have to say a ton about them. We know Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are absolute studs. Mike Evans, 23.8 target share last year. Chris Godwin had 22.2 target share in this offense. Mike Evans had 118 targets. Chris Godwin had 119. They both balled out last year. Mike Evans, he averaged 20 yards per catch against man. Only 3 other wide receivers topped that feat. He also had the most receiving yards on targets beyond 10 plus yards. So there's a lot to like. If you look at wide receiver numbers, the thing with Mike Evans last year, he was a little inconsistent in terms of what he was giving you. Because if you look, he had 5 wide receiver 1 weeks. He had 0 wide receiver 2 weeks. He only had 3 weeks where he was a wide receiver 3. And he had basically had 5 weeks last year where he was kind of unusable, where you wouldn't want to start him at all. Now, if you look at Chris Godwin, he had 5 wide receiver 1 weeks, 3 wide receiver 2 weeks, and then he had 6 wide receiver 3 weeks, which 2 of those were actually where he was wide receiver 25. So he was much, much more consistent. But now we have Tom Brady we bring into the fold, and we kind of look at, okay, does Chris Godwin play that Julian Edelman type role that we've come to so accustomed to with Tom Brady and what he looks to? I think he does. I don't think anything changes. I think he continues to play the slot like he did last year. So I think it still wheels up for Chris Godwin. I'm a little bit more concerned about Mike Evans just because of can Tom Brady consistently throw the deep ball. But if you look at Tom Brady's deep ball numbers, they weren't bad last year, considering they didn't have a deep threat. Like, who was their deep threat? Philip fucking Dorsett? Like, that was, they had nobody last year. So it's really hard to judge that. So I do think that this offense can resemble something what it did last year. I do think that some of these numbers are going to take a step back in terms of their pass volume. I think they're going to try to run the ball a little bit more. Their defense was actually not bad. I think they were number 5 in DVOA last year among their defense. Their secondary is what really needed help. They've addressed some of that this offseason. So I do think that this team is a little bit more balanced than what it was last year. They're not having to bail out the defense, and the 30 interceptions that Jameis Winston decided to throw last year. Now let's go into the good stuff. Here's the good stuff, because we don't really need to spend a ton of time on Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. They're 2 beasts. They're both well deserving of being drafted inside the wide receiver 1 range. I definitely believe. So let's go to the running backs. There's been a debate going on fantasy Twitter, and I don't fucking get it. Okay, so maybe you can fucking tell me why. So Ronald Jones last year played better than what I think people expected, because the year before he was complete garbage, right? But he still wasn't good. Okay, let's put that out there first. Last year he played 37.5% of the snaps. That's not a good number for any running back. He had 46.9 opportunity share. He had 10.5 fantasy points per game. They averaged 25.6 run plays per game, which was average. They were 14th last year in run plays. He had 21 red zone touches, 41 targets, 31 receptions. He did have 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns, 21st in yards created per touch, 24th in evaded tackles, 22nd in breakaway rate. Right? We know that he did not start over Peyton Barber. He actually got benched in a game because he missed a pass blocking opportunity, and they benched his ass. Peyton Barber, he couldn't beat out Peyton fucking Barber, right? Peyton Barber received 170 total touches last year, so they bring in Keyshawn Vaughn, right? Enter Keyshawn Vaughn. I have heard some ridiculous shit about Keyshawn Vaughn on Twitter so far. I've heard all of a sudden now there's all these Ronald Jones truthers out there, and everyone loves Ronald Jones all of a sudden. I don't fucking get it. I think he is a jag. He is average at best. I do think he is going to be involved in the offense. I will give you that. But I've been hearing, Ronald Jones is younger than Keyshawn Vaughn. Okay, and they make it sound like fucking Keyshawn Vaughn is 26 or something. Yeah, he's 23 and he's 22. Oh, okay. Well, in reality, Keyshawn Vaughn just fucking turned 23 this month, and Ronald Jones turns 22. Or sorry, it turns 23 in August. We're talking about a couple months. And secondly, when did we ever care about what age a running back is? Like, do you care? As long as he's not 30, I don't care that he's 23 or if he was 24. And then I've also heard the narrative of, well, he's not big enough to be a 3-down back. Excuse me? He's 5'10", 214. What are we talking about? He is perfect size to be a 3-down back. So all of it just doesn't make any sense to me. And I don't understand, I guess, that all of a sudden the switch to, it's like there's something new, and like people like, so there starts to be some hype towards something, and people have to come out and be like, No, let me tell you why you're wrong. And we're really going to stand for Ronald Jones. We're doing that now. That's what people are doing. I don't know. But I love Keyshawn Vaughn. We know this. Keyshawn Vaughn has the making to be a 3-down back. They drafted Keyshawn Vaughn. They did not draft Ronald Jones. Bruce Arians, that is. And so at the very least, Keyshawn Vaughn is going to be the pass-catching running back. We know that Tom Brady likes to check the ball down and uses running back as a pass catcher. I think that spells really well for Keyshawn Vaughn. I think at worst, in a PPR format, Keyshawn Vaughn should be viewed as at least an RB3. And I am perfectly okay with that. I do think that he has RB1 upside. I think that is in the range of outcomes for him. I don't think it's incredibly likely. I wouldn't go out on a limb to say that I think that's I think there's a 20-30% chance, maybe, and that is too high, that he could have an RB1 type year. But at the very least, I think he can at least be a solid RB2 in this offense. And I think people that are overhyping Ronald Jones, I think is ridiculous. They have not shown any love for Ronald Jones whatsoever. They did not draft Ronald Jones. And Ronald Jones was average last year. People were excited about that. Like, okay, so he wasn't dog shit last year. He was just average. Cool. Anyways, what is your thoughts on all that? I had to get it off my chest before we moved on to something else. But what is your thoughts on all that?
Well, one, I think we can just clip out what you just said and then just replay it every time this conversation comes up, because I feel like this is not the last time we're going to have a Keyshawn Vaughn, Ronald Jones discussion on this podcast. But second, to me, this discussion begins and ends with Arians giving Ronald Jones the keys of the kingdom for like a week or two, and then Peyton Barber came right back into the fucking fold. Like that's it. Like, was he better than what he was the year before? Yes. Like you said, maybe he was just shit instead of dog shit. But like that still doesn't mean that he's going to hold Keyshawn Vaughn off the field. And like I haven't seen that he's not the he's not big enough thing, but that makes no fucking sense to me. He's 214 pounds or something like that. That is plenty big enough to be a 3-down back. Do I think that Vaughn completely puts Ronald Jones on the shelf? Probably not. Like, I don't see him getting Christian McCaffrey workload, right? But I think he could easily right. I think Vaughn could easily have 65 to 70% of the running back touches in this offense. I think he's a stronger runner than what Ronald Jones is. Maybe he doesn't have the burst or the long speed, but that's not entirely important for the running back position anyway. We see guys like Kareem Hunt and even Le'Veon Bell coming in having ran 4.6s at the combine, and I think they've done fine for themselves. So, like I said, to me, this entire discussion begins and ends with he couldn't beat out Peyton Barber, who they just let walk. Right, like he's now in Washington. They just completely let him walk, and he couldn't beat him out. Even if Ronald Jones starts the season as the starter in air quotes, he's not going to hold that for long. It's going to become, at worst, a 1A, 1B situation in favor of Vaughn. And right now in best balls, Keyshawn Vaughn, RB32 with an ADP of 67.76. And then Ronald Jones, RB38 at 88.9. I think that disparity is just going to continue to grow as the season wears on. And if you want to draft Ronald Jones, by all means, go ahead. But you're wasting a pick, in my opinion.
Yeah. No. Okay. All right. So we're on the same page. I don't want to keep this going forever. I just hope I don't see any more like, I'd take Zach Moss over it, and like, get the fuck out of here. Get out. You're fired. Okay. We'll get to Zach Moss another day. I'm so tired of hearing about Zach Moss and the Skip Bayless level takes that are being thrown around on Twitter about Zach Moss over Cam Akers, which is fucking ridiculous. Anyways, I think I've cussed enough for one podcast here. I'm sorry for everybody.
And your face is getting as red as your hoodie. You're getting all fired up, all worked up over there, buddy.
Well, sometimes you got to rant. Sometimes you just got to let it out, And I try to say it for the podcast. There's so often that I want to say something on Twitter, and I'm like, you know what? it's not going to work because you can't talk to anybody on Twitter because it always turns into an argument and people don't they dig into their sides and no one gives anything. So I'm like, hey, I'll just wait till I get on the podcast and then I can say what I want to say then. So, anyways,
So are you saying that sometimes you just have to shake it off? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, like Taylor Swift says, sometimes you just gotta shake it off, shake them haters off, right? Like Taylor says, I'm lightning on my feet. So anyway. I guess the only last thing we have to talk about, I guess, is the tight end position here. Do you have any interest in Gronk? I know, we don't really know what to make of him. He sat out a year. He's not old. People keep saying, he's old. He's the same age as Travis Kelce is. People need to stop saying he's old. Now, if you want to say that he has had a rough road, he certainly has with injuries, and it certainly is something that has plagued his career. His last year in the league before he retired, he definitely looked like a 40-year-old man. Now, maybe this year off has helped his body. He's been able to get back in better shape. I don't know. I mean, it's Rob Gronkowski. We know that dude's out there slamming beers every day and doing cake stands and, partying every day. But I do think that Gronk has some tight end one appeal. It really is going to depend on where he goes in drafts. I think he certainly can finish the tight end one. It doesn't take a whole lot to do it. Let's be honest, at the tight end position. But it's going to depend on where he goes. If he were to go in the 9th, 10th round, I'd have some interest in him because I think that he has some upside there. But if he started to get jumping the shark and start going as the 5th or 6th tight end overall, I don't think I'd be a buyer there because I think he's going to have a limited role in the offense. I think he probably plays around 50% of the snaps.
I truly didn't fully understand all of the immediate hype that came along with whenever Gronk came back. He's obviously a lovable character. We all love the personality that is Gronk, but people were just like, "Oh, Will's up. It's Gronk time. He's back." Like you said, the last time we saw him, he did not look good. And then he goes and he stops playing football. He loses what looked like 80 pounds. He literally looked like a skeleton of his former self. And now all of a sudden he's just going to be able to jump back into the playing field, put on he probably literally lost 30 pounds at least. So now he's going to try and, let's face it, in the NFL, they have alternate means by adding muscle mass. So maybe it won't be that big of an issue. And I'm sure he was working out, lifting kegs and doing, keg presses and shit like that. But I wonder how much he was really working out, what kind of football shape he's going to be in. And then there's going to be I can't think off the top of my head outside of a Randy Moss kind of year, or a Randy, Aaron Hernandez whenever he was there, what kind of targets Gronk will command with Godwin and Evans, outside of him. So that's kind of what I wonder about. Right now he is going as tight end 10 with an ADP of 102, according to like I said, May Best Ball 10 ADP.
And I don't hate that. Tight end 10. If he stays there, tight end 10, tight end 11, tight end 12, somewhere in that range, I'd have some interest in him. But just understand that you're drafting a player that's likely going to be a part-time player. He's probably going to be heavily utilized. He's going to be utilized in the red zone. And I do think that Bruce Arians schemes up some plays and some route concepts for him that were so very similar in New England and stuff that they're comfortable with, because we already know that if there's anybody here, they obviously have a rapport together, and so that will instantly help Rob Gronkowski. But I just don't think he gets the type of target share or not the target share, but the type of snap share. I don't think he plays a ton of snaps. I think he's a role player. I do not think he comes out and goes out there and plays 70-80% of the snaps or anything like that. So I think that is something that people should be keeping in mind with Rob Gronkowski. So
going at real quick, going at tight end 9 ahead of him, Austin Hooper. Would you rather have Austin Hooper in Cleveland or Gronk?
I'd probably rather have Hooper.
Going right behind him, tight end 11, Jared Cook. Cook or Gronk?
I'd probably rather have Gronk.
Okay. Next to Noah Fant, Mike Gesicki. Either of them over Gronk for you?
Ooh, that's tough. I love some Mike Gesicki this year. Love me some Mike Gesicki. I think I would rather have Gesicki because I think he has a more. I don't know. That's tough. I think if I had to make the decision, I probably would go. I would probably wait because I feel like I could get Gesicki a few rounds later than Gronk and get better value out of it. But if I absolutely knew that they weren't going to be on the board, I would probably take Gronk.
So as of right now, Gesicki is only going one round later than Gronk. Like I said, Gronk was at 102.1 ADP. Gesicki's at 113.7. We might be looking at another year of for me anyway, the Atlanta tight end being my tight end of choice in redraft, Hayden Hurst at tight end 15 at with an ADP of 120 currently. I mean, I'm expecting that to rise even if it's just slightly. He's currently going behind Dallas Goedert, the tight end 2 in Philly. So
yeah, we'll see there. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But like I said, I think the tight end position is a little bit deeper than it has been in the last few years. So
yeah, there's more guys that you feel like less gross about taking, right? Like normally it's like the top 3 or 4, then you might as well just wait until round 13. Like there are some more options where it seems like, oh, okay, like I don't feel like I need to take a shower after taking him.
No, for sure. So, and we'll definitely dive more deeper into it. So, I think that pretty much wraps up the NFC South, the dirty South. So let's jump in to topic number 2, which is a topic that I am excited about. And let's talk about some keeper league stuff, right? Keeper leagues are the redheaded stepchild. Like I said, they're kind of a mix between a dynasty league and a redraft league. You can do it where I've seen people only keep 1 player or 2 players, and then all the way up to I've seen more leagues where people keep 10 players or you keep your starter roster or whatever. And the league that I'm in, that I can speak from experience from, is my home league. We've been doing it now for 10 years. You can keep 4 players for free, and then the next 2 are $20 a piece to build up the pile, but so you can keep it to 6 players. And you're allowed to trade all the way up until the day of the draft, which is, I think, something that you definitely should be doing in a keeper league, because I think you can really sway some things, which is what we do. We allow trades all the way up until we submit our keepers, and we submit our keepers 2 days before the draft starts. So in terms of keepers, I know you haven't played a lot of keeper leagues, but I think there's some things to try to take advantage of. If you're in a league that you can trade in keepers like during the off season, I would definitely take advantage of it. Something that I've been doing the last couple of years, which really has worked out for me, is one, I crush the draft whenever I draft. And so my team is absolutely stacked the next year, right? Always. Like this year, I'm going to have to decide if I'm going to keep like Stephon Diggs and Aaron Jones. Like that's how good my team is, right? Like and I can keep 6 players. Right now, my team is, little humble brag, is Saquon Barkley, who I made a trade for last year. And that's how I acquired him. And then I have Chris Godwin, the GOAT, of course. And then Nick Chubb, Miles Sanders, Aaron Jones, Stephon Diggs, Allen Robinson, Austin Hooper. Like the team was loaded last year, right? So what I did last year is I traded, at the time, I had Julio Jones and Antonio Brown. And what I did was because you can only keep up to 6. So what I ended up doing is I traded a bunch. I traded Chris Carson. I traded Hunter Henry. I traded Allen Robinson, which I got back. The guy's, whatever. I'm not gonna say it. Maybe he's listening. But I traded him. Rashad Penny to go with Chris Carson. Darius Geis. Like I traded him like 7 players because his team was trash and all he had was Saquon. And I acquired Saquon through that deal. Mind you, only player, basically for me, only the trade was because I wasn't going to be able to keep any of those guys. I traded basically Saquon for Julio Jones straight up in a keeper league where I can keep Saquon the rest of his career if I want, right? So I felt like the deal really worked out for me. And it's a really underrated move to make in a keeper league if you're allowed to make trades throughout the offseason, which I think you should. And if you can't, I would bring it up with your league mates because a lot of people don't think about it as something that's a viable strategy. But you can't do that, and that's what I did, and that's what I'm going to do again this year because my team, again, is once again stacked, and I'm going to go out headhunting for another position that I may like. And so I think that is one strategy that people in Keeper League should be doing. And now the other thing with, like I've said, like Keeper Leagues is very similar in a lot of ways to Dynasty. Your first round, because the way we do it is we basically after we submit our keepers, we then place ADP, whatever their current ADP at that time is the round that you lose. So for me, I usually always lose my first 6 picks, but some people may end up keeping, you may lose your 2nd round pick, your 5th round pick, your 7th, 8th, whatever, right? And so inevitably that first round, 99% of the time, it's always the rookies that they get drafted. Rookie running backs, generally are always the ones that go first. Maybe somebody takes a wide receiver, but that generally doesn't happen, right? And so, a lot of ways, it is somewhat like dynasty, right? Obviously, age matters a ton. People overvalue age, even somewhat as well, where people will value a player who's much younger versus older. So there is some dynasty concepts to it in terms of that. You're just not going to be able to keep your entire team. So it's kind of the best of both worlds to allow you to, you can kind of build the squad depending on how many players you're allowed to keep in a keeper league. But you can also have that draft every year that people love, because a lot of people just love to draft. And then a rookie draft is just not enough for them, because people, let's face it, they're not going to spend the time in a keeper, in a dynasty. A lot of people don't watch rookies, don't watch college, don't know who these guys are, and they're not going to spend the time in February and March to understand who these guys are, right? So, that's where keeper leagues come in. I think keeper leagues are a lot of fun. There's so many different variations. There's so many different things you can do. I've heard of all different kinds of things. There's leagues where there's one keeper or two, and then there's keeper leagues where you basically they're like on contract, so you can keep them for 3 years, and then after that they go back into the free agency pool, which makes things a little bit more interesting in terms of where you keep somebody, how you keep somebody. So there's a lot of different things that go into a keeper league, right? So for me, I do value age a little bit more than others, right? And I try to keep my team a little bit younger. I'm willing to move on from a player like I did last year with Julio at 30. I was like, he's coming he's on the downward curve of his career, no matter what, the way you're looking at it. And I think trying to jump off of players, I did the same thing. I love some fucking Calvin Johnson, and I traded him the year before he retired, or the off season before he retired. Before he retired, I traded him, and it worked out, obviously, because he retired and the guy was pissed. But I think with keeper leagues it's trying to exploit things like that, and those are some things that I do. If you're allowed to trade, it's who gives a shit? You package up as many players as you possibly can that you're not going to be able to keep, and then you try to acquire a star. Go to a team that is hurting, that has nobody, and maybe only has one or two really good players, and then try to get one of them from him, but you give him a whole war chest of players, helps him in the immediate, but also helps you as well, and it really didn't cost you anything.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think there's a lot of what you were touching on that also transfers over to dynasty, right? Like trying to get rid of the guys before that wall really hits, before their production really drops off. I guess the thing for me, because I went directly from redraft to dynasty, there was no in between. I just jumped completely in the deep end with dynasty. The thing for me, you mentioned how your league is set up. I think the thing that makes it difficult is because you touched on this a little bit. There are so many different ways you can format a keeper league, right? Like you were talking about one keeper versus 10. Do you lose rounds that you took them in? I've heard of people talk about you lose a round each year, right? So if you're keeping someone in the 5th, next year's a 4th, next year's a 3rd. I've heard of it gets chopped in half. So it goes from a 5th round pick to a 3rd round pick. You were talking about yours where you can keep them for their career. Other ones you can only keep them for a certain amount of time. So the way that your league is set up, that you're talking about, I guess that sounds like you're in a league with a bunch of the kids that you coach in Little League, which I mean it's not all that impressive, but nonetheless, is that how you would want to set it up if you were to institute a new keeper league, or is there a different way in terms of losing the round or not losing the round? With what you said, is that how you would do it, or would you do it a little bit differently if you were going to start one from scratch today?
First of all, it is not with It's not with my Little League team. It is with dudes that I've known since high school. I cannot help it that I play with a bunch of, but this is for real though, that is typical redraft league though. Most of them,
I know.
They are the stereotypical. They show up with their draft mag on draft day that came out in May, and they're reading through it, and they're they're skimming through the pages real quick, and they're okay. I'm going to take this guy. You get to like the 9th, 10th round, nobody knows who anybody is anymore. You start drafting some rookies, and people are like, "Who? Who's that?" Like this year, I can see like Justin Jefferson. Who is he playing for? But that is like honestly your typical redraft league. Like that is what it is, right? It's not like we all like to think that we play in like really competitive, ultra competitive leagues, but we just don't. Okay, right. Home leagues are home leagues for a reason.
Yes,
yeah. and they are easy. But I will say this: I told you the players that I have. Every year my team looks like that. Every year my team is stacked like that. I have never won. Not once.
It's the way the cookie crumbles, right?
Dude, it is the most frustrating. Like, I swear to God, like, I've talked about this offseason, like, sacrificing a chicken to get the curse off me. Because, like, literally every year, I lose in the first round to the worst team ever. Or if I get a bye, it's the next round. Like, literally every year, I lose. And I'm like, I need to do something to break this curse that I'm under. Because my team is too good to do this. So I'm on, like, to answer your question, if I was starting one, I think so with a keeper league, I would probably want that sweet spot of probably 4 to 8 keepers, somewhere in that range, because it allows you to build a team. Because if you only do 1 or 2, like, it's not really, to me, it's not really worth it in my opinion. Maybe, we all have different, ideas and stuff like that. John Deere, Master 5000. That's good. But we all have different things that, but I feel like that there's a sweet spot there because in a sense, what you're wanting is, in a keeper league, is to at least have some ability to actually build a team for the long haul, right? Because just keeping Saquon Barkley every year and the rest of what's the point? Might as well just do a regular redraft league, right? Like you're not really giving yourself any sort of advantage by doing that. So I do think the sweet spot is somewhere in that 4 to 8 range. I think PPR is a must, or a half-point PPR. Get different with it, Like I will never ever, and I get so angry every year, but it happens every year when people keep quarterbacks. I wouldn't even keep Patrick Mahomes if I had Patrick Mahomes, I don't think. It's just not worth it. Unless your team is so bad you don't have any other options, so you keep him. But chances are you should have players you should be able to keep over them. Unless you're in a super flex, then it changes things. But if it's a single quarterback league, you should never keep a quarterback. You should not value them the same way. Because every year people do it. Everyone's keeping quarterbacks. I'm like, thank you. You just helped me out. So you just save me the worry of having to draft. Like usually I wait till the last pick of every of the draft to draft my quarterback. Also, the leagues that use kickers should just fucking be banned. Those should never even exist. I don't believe in that either. But for me, in terms of a keeper, I think 4 to 8 is really, and add some incentives to it. Like I said, like us making it the 5th and 6th, you have to have some extra skin in the game. It builds the pot up a little bit more. And it really makes people like, okay, if you're kind of on, because there's just people that like, I really like to draft. I like to draft as many players as I can. It kind of balances it out a little bit because only people that, unless you have like really, really solid players, or, you just have money and you don't really give a shit about paying the extra $40, you're going to keep the guys anyways, which you have some of those people too. But for the most part, people are a little less inclined to keep a player if they're not 100% confident in them. So it ends up putting some solid players back in the pool. Because like I mentioned, I made a trade last year for Saquon, traded away Allen Robinson. The guy ended up not keeping Allen Robinson, and which is funny because he asked me about it, who he should keep afterwards, because we already made the trade and everything. And I'm like, and he told me, he's like, man, you think I should keep Allen Robinson? I'm like, man, if you don't want to keep Allen Robinson, don't keep Allen Robinson. And I knew my first pick, I'm sitting there on the board, I'm waiting, all these picks go by, 7th, we get to the 7th round, I'm up, and here's Allen Robinson on the board. Allen Robinson, thank you, Allen Robinson, he's mine, got it back, thank you. So, love me some Allen Robinson, but yeah, this is what I love about a keeper league, because like it's that mix between a redraft and a dynasty league. So,
what about the the round penalties? Like where do you fall on that? Like,
I do think some of the other ones are interesting. So like if you drafted, let's say like Pat Mahomes in the 13th, I do think it's somewhat interesting because it changes the values of players, and that is what is probably the most important thing in terms of a keeper league. Is so if you have something like that, where say the next year Pat Mahomes is valued at a 7th round pick because you have to cut his value in half. I would be more apropos to keep Patrick Mahomes at that point because then he becomes a much more different value at that point. And that is where things get a little bit tricky because a lot of people say, hey, I drafted, I don't know, a player off top, anybody, but let's say they, hey, I can keep this player X in the 8th round, but he's really going right now and drafts in the 2nd round. But then you also have maybe like Aaron Jones or something like that, who you'd have to keep, but he's going in the 3rd round, and you have to make that kind of decision on who to keep, even though one's gets a little bit better value, but maybe one's a better player, right, or has a better higher upside or something like that. So I think leagues like that are interesting because it makes you think a little bit more, and it's not so cookie cutter of a decision. Because for me, you're just keeping them as where their ADP is, so. That can change drastically, in terms of how things work and who you should keep. You'd be surprised, though, that people would only keep like 2 players, but maybe they have some guys that like would be like 12th, 13th round picks that are like, some guys who have some nice upside or path to relevancy, and then people just don't keep them. I don't know why you just didn't keep that guy. You could have had him in like the 12th round. But anyways, I do think that strategy or that approach to a keeper league is pretty interesting because it makes you think a little bit more and changes stuff up. We've always done it the ADP way. We pick a site. We use Fantasy Football Calculator. Everybody knows what it is. We go there. We assign everybody. And then actually for keeper leagues, because it does get because like if you were to try to use like Yahoo or ESPN, it's much tougher to try to assign players their draft. We use it's only like $20, and I don't know why I don't hear about people talk about it. It's called Fan Draft. And it's actually a program that they come out with an update every year, and it's like a virtual draft room, and it's you have a virtual draft board, so you hook it up to your computer, you hook it up to your TV, and you draft through it, and it's like $20 every year to update it, and that's all it is. I think, or maybe even cheaper, it might be like $17, but it is by far the best thing that's out there. You can customize everything, you can set all your keepers in advance. So everyone submits their keepers. I go in and I put them all in. So whenever we go into the draft, hit start draft, and they're already in their rounds where they're supposed to go. So it automatically picks cycles right to them to speed the draft up. So that is another actually thing that I would tell people if you're in a keeper league. I would certainly recommend play draft. Like I said, it's free, or it's not free, but it's like $20. I mean, it's totally worth the value. I think that is right around the price I would assume was like a paper draft board. But this is so much easier. You don't have the fucking big ass piece of paper and everything else. You just hook it up to your TV and you roll. So
typically, like with a normal redraft league, that's like what, like 15, 16 rounds is like a normal, like like your typical home draft. Or do keeper leagues have a couple extra rounds tacked on at the end because of the the ability to keep guys? Like do you normally find keeper leagues having like maybe like 18, 19 rounds because of the ability to keep guys year to year, or is it still just like your basic like 15, 16 round draft?
I think ours is 18 or 19 rounds, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would typically say yes to have a little bit more depth, a little bit more bench space, because you don't want to be put in a position. And I would also probably recommend upping your IR spots as well, because you don't want to be in a position where you have to feel like you have to drop a player who maybe is a player you'd want to keep, because that is something that we experienced a lot where, I don't know, Christian McCaffrey tears ACL this year, and then you're like, fuck. And if you only have 5 bench spots, and then you're like, shit, most leagues in a redraft league, you just keep it, you just release them or something like that, especially once you get to buys.
Right.
Maybe not Christian McCaffrey's probably not a fair guy because I don't think anybody's going to be dropping him, but maybe like an Aaron Jones or somebody that's a little bit lower, Josh Jacobs or something like that, that people would just drop. Well, and here's that's a good thing you actually happy you brought that up, because another really, really good pro tip is if you're a team that's out of it, about week 14, week 15 is the time to start really scouring the fuck out of the waivers, out of your free agency, to see what players were dropped. Because if you get a lot of season-ending injuries, and if some of those guys are really strong players, I would go and just fucking load my team up. If I'm out of the playoffs, I have no shot. I don't care about the guys I have in my team, my bench spots. Who cares anymore? Just go and load up your team with all these guys who are getting dropped, or maybe use some foresight and think, hey, maybe this guy could be somebody next year. Look at his situation, whatever, and try to use some advanced thought on that. So that's another thing that I usually do, and I'll go through and I'll add a bunch of players. Because so we use like ESPN, I think, as our who runs it. Because I upload it after we do it through Play Draft, and usually it's still open until like March or April or something like that. Like where you can still go on there and actually pick guys up and drop players from your team. So I usually am always paying attention to it and seeing what's going on. If anybody's out there that like, and I'll go and look real quick and I'll add them. So that's actually another thing that I would be paying attention to if I was in a keeper league, would be trying to figure out guys that players have dropped and add them back to your team. So that is another reason why I would want to add more IR spots, so you can actually put guys on there, so you don't have to make a decision to drop, a player who you'd maybe think about keeping the next year.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So to wrap us up here, what about things that you would not do, or things that you would recommend against? You obviously just laid out a bunch of things that you would look to do. Is there anything, or like any common mistakes, I guess, that you see? I mean, you already mentioned about keeping quarterbacks. It's obviously something that you would advise against. But any other like common mistakes or anything that you would look at where you would say to not do in keeper leagues?
I think one of the biggest things I see is people not spending enough time researching, especially in a keeper league, the later rounds for those rookies. Not the Clyde Edwards-Hilairs and the Jonathan Taylors, the guys that everybody's going to know and it's going to get super hype, but the knowing who Darrington Evans is. Guys like that who are going to be going later in drafts, or a DJ Dallas, who, if something happens to Chris Carson, could end up being a big part of that offense. Guys like that, knowing who those guys are in advance, especially in a keeper league, and trying to stash them on your roster can play huge dividends. Because not just one, because if they earn themselves a starting role for the next year, you already have them on your team. Because that's so often I see guys in keeper leagues, they'll draft Adrian Peterson or something in the 11th or 12th round, instead of going after a player like maybe a rookie wide receiver or whatever, because they don't spend enough time researching who these guys are. And they're like, I'll pick them up later or whatever, right? So unless they play for their favorite home team or whatever, that's about the only reason they're going to know who some of these guys are. Like I said, I remember Michael Gallup's rookie year. I drafted Michael Gallup. People are like, who's Michael Gallup? And I'm like, really? Like that is pretty much par for the course for a lot of this stuff, right? I guarantee you, I could draft Darrington Evans and unless he gets super super fucking hype, nobody would know who he is in most keeper leagues, because people just don't dig that deep. And so those are things that I would definitely be looking to do in a keeper league, and those are the guys that I target once I get past my starting roster, which my team, since I have 6, my entire starting roster is pretty much set. So I just come out fucking firing on as high of upside guys as I could find. I don't give a shit about their floors. I've already got my roster set. My running backs are set. My wide receivers are set. I'm not drafting for any starters outside of a tight end and a quarterback, and I don't really care about those, and I'll draft those later. So I just come out and just hammer the most high upside guys. And I may even draft a guy a little higher than maybe what his ADP is, because I feel like that down the road that they have a little bit higher upside than what most do. So those are all things that I would be looking at doing in a keeper league. And, that is how I would be always trying to draft. Like, I do that in a redraft, but even more so in a keeper, because you can really, hit some major home runs later in the draft.
I like it, man. Makes a lot of sense. And if for anyone out there who's listening now, if there's any other sort of format or any kind of content that you want us to touch on that you either kind of feels gets neglected, like keeper leagues, please make sure to reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and basically anywhere. Like we're trying to get to everywhere where you guys might be. So if there's anything you want us to hit on, dig deeper on, whether it's article format, podcast, video, just please reach out and let us know, because we obviously want to help you guys out as much as possible.
No, 100%, and be on the lookout for the new podcast that we're looking to do. I think what do we decide on? I think fantasy front lines or something like that.
Yeah, front lines of fantasy.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I think that's what our title we're looking for. So it should be a really good show. We're going to have some veterans, maybe even some active duty military personnel on there. We're going to be talking about their military service and, some fantasy football as well. So that'll be its own separate show. So we're really excited about that one. We should have that one probably starting here in the next week or two. So be on the lookout for that one. And we're also going to be doing some shirts and some stuff like that, giving some away some of that stuff. So really excited about that. So anyways, I do believe Cody actually has a YouTube video coming out. It's going to be top 10 rookie running backs. That should be good. The thumbnail on that one looks beautiful. Just want to say that, just throw that out there. There was a disaster of what it was going to look like before, but I had to come in and save the day on that one.
Well, can't be perfect in everything.
Yeah. So, anyways, I really appreciate everybody checking out the show this week. Be sure to give us that thumbs up on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button if you're listening to this through podcast. Please consider rating and reviewing the show. It really helps us out. Really appreciate it. Again, like Cody said, if there's anything else you guys want to hear, want us to talk about, let us know. The show is for you. It's not for us. You can find me on Twitter at FantasyWrath13. My DMs are always open. You can always slide into them, or you can find Cody on Twitter at CKutzerFF. And until next week, I really appreciate it, and we will see you guys again next week. Peace. Keyshawn Vaughn is life.
Eject.
Man. Fuck.
Eject.
Can you do anything right? Keyshawn Vaughn is life. I'm out.